Criqui. Where's that from?
It's French.
Criqui. So should I say croquet?
No. Definitely not. Definitely not.
Hi, I'm Aaron Anderson, and you're listening to the Reinvention podcast, and I'm here with Alex Criqui of Reclaiming the Monument. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. And as always, my lovely co-host, Tara Cortland.
I'm just here to make fun of Aaron.
Yeah, that's actually true. So I'm just going to jump right in.
Mm-hmm.
I am looking on my screen here
Mm-hmm.
at, I'm sure, an image that you've seen quite a lot.
Yeah.
This is the cover of the National Geographic in January 2020, and the title is 71 Photographs from an Unforgettable Year. The photograph here is there was a monument of Robert E. Lee down in Richmond, and there's a projection on it of George Floyd's face and Black Lives Matter on that. And then the monument is just covered in graffiti. And of course, this image captured the world's attention. And you are largely responsible for that image of George Floyd on that monument that evening.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about what was going on downtown in 2020 in Richmond and how you got involved in all of that.
Well, I'm sure as most people know, obviously there was a massive national uprising following the murder of George Floyd by Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. For when, everything kind of erupted in Richmond, I for the first couple nights, I wasn't out with everyone because I didn't really, realize what was happening, at those first couple nights. By the third night, I went down to Monument Avenue and checked it out and ended up walking around, marching through the streets for a couple nights. Had some pretty brutal moments of police violence directed towards myself and the other protesters.
So let me just paint this picture. So after the murder of George Floyd,
Mm-hmm.
people in Richmond came out in the streets.
Yeah.
In droves, right?
Mm-hmm.
We were downtown when a bus caught fire.
A bus caught.
Somebody lit a bus on fire.
I like saying a bus caught fire because it sounds like it spontaneously.
Yeah.
Yes, but
But
there was a bus fire.
But the streets were
It was amazing.
just teeming
It was
with
amazing.
people mad. I mean,
It was amazing.
I don't know that anyone can recognize just how full of people these streets were.
Yeah, it was pretty wild.
The cops came out with tear gas and
Tear gas, flash grenades, rubber bullets, all that stuff.
Stuff.
I think the third night is the first night I went out there. It was like a Sunday. I went out during the day, and the energy on Monument Avenue was so beautiful. It was families together, people picnicking. There were people skateboarding on the Jeb Stuart Monument, and that was covering it already with graffiti and street art, and that was such a radically different experience towards the Monument Avenue that I'd ever experienced before. It's always someplace felt very stuffy. You weren't supposed to step on the grass really. You'd see people maybe playing cornhole or something on the lawn, but you never saw the Richmond I knew and the Richmond I've experienced my whole life here on Monument Avenue. And all of a sudden, the subcultures, the street culture, all had just taken over this extremely rich, mostly white, wealthy part of our city,
Right.
with all these really hateful, historically revisionist monuments all over it.
Yeah. So a lot of people probably don't know, and I didn't know this. You move here, and there's this thing called Monument Avenue, and it's just full. It's this big, it's two streets, but there's a greenway in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
People would play hacky sack and cornhole.
But not too close to Robert E. Lee because we don't step on the grass near
Right,
Robert
yeah.
E. Lee.
That's right. But
Are you
there's
from here?
Yeah, I grew
Yeah.
up here, yeah.
so say this again. They don't step on the grass.
You don't step on the grass near Robert E. Lee. You're not, and it's been illegal to climb on the monument, which has steps on it. You could walk up the steps. And people didn't. I mean, for one thing, it's illegal, and for another thing, I don't know. Just people generally did not. It was always a thing that college students would do late at night. You might get drunk and try to get on the monument. The thing's a gazillion stories tall, so you're never going to climb to the top of it, except then people did in the protests. But in general, no, you didn't. People didn't. You don't touch the monument. You don't walk on the grass. You don't that's Robert E. Lee.
For years, right?
For years, you don't. Yeah.
But this was a beautiful part of the town, and people, and there was this, it was part of Richmond's signature. These monuments on this thing, and what you're saying is that it changed radically. What those monuments meant changed radically.
Well, yeah, and one of the really fascinating things about that first first or second night of major protests when they were breaking glass and doing graffiti was the graffiti was still on the monuments. There was so much graffiti all over the city. I've lived in this city my whole life, and it's not that no one ever graffitied the monuments. They have in recent years actually put graffiti on the monuments. The police come through so fast and take it off immediately. I've never in my life seen it in person, any graffiti on the monuments. There's no news stories, but catching a glimpse of it is really hard because they come through so fast. And so like to have that graffiti on the monuments the next day and for days and for days and for weeks, and people keep adding to it, and the police not being able to quite get their act together to figure out they just let it go and just let people do it because they just couldn't stop this wave of uprising. It was amazing.
I mean, so we've sort of painted this picture. The city, like the physical space and Monument Avenue there, especially around Robert E. Lee, especially around that statue of Robert E. Lee, becomes a focal point for massive demonstrations and uprisings, and then clashes with the police, tear gas,
Eventually,
rubber bullets, all that sort of stuff. How do you end up projecting stuff on this?
My creative partner and best friend, Dustin Klein, who's not here right now, he and I are doing the project. I'm the creative director. He's the technical director of our project as we've, kind of turned into a more formal thing. It started off really DIY. So Dustin is a light designer by trade. He's he does lights for bands and for concerts and for festivals and stuff. And a lot of that involves doing projection mapping. So projection mapping is kind of take your basic projector, or a little bit higher than consumer grade projector. And then you can kind of design it, choose where it goes and control the light, in an artful way. So he had all this equipment, COVID had been going on. So he was out of work. There was no concerts. And, I had, after the first couple of nights of being out there, I had, talked to Dustin and encouraged him to come out and see what was going on. Because he had seen the buses on fire and stuff. The first couple nights of really intense destruction, we were both like, okay, I don't know what's going on. I don't really think violence solves anything. I think violence is a counterproductive tactic when you're dealing with something as powerful and as good at violence as the state.
Yeah, they're fairly fairly well equipped.
They'll beat you at that game if you want to play that game. But then I went out that Sunday and saw how beautiful it was, and there weren't it felt kind of like. There used to be this thing in Richmond called Slaughterama, which is this thing on Belle Isle where it was bike jousting, and it felt like that subculture, had kind of taken over Monument Avenue, the Richmond that comes from all the college students being here and stuff, all the young people, all the art, all the music, had taken over Monument Avenue, and so then later that night I saw the ugly side with the police, and then the next night got chased around and got tear gassed really badly. But then the next day I told Dustin, let's come check it out. It's going to be, it's come March, and he checked it out. And that was the day of the mass tear gassing on June 1st. And that day, that was a really tragic day because there'd been 3 really intense days of violence and destruction. And I think people in the city were starting to realize this isn't the way. We're angry, we're mad. We want to do something. But let's not,
This is the day that there were just people around the monument and the police rolled up and then just sort of fired tear gas.
Yeah. So
there's a video. I have a video.
Yeah. So basically, that was a really beautiful moment before the police showed up. It was a sit-in. There was elderly folks there. There were babies. There were children. There were families. There were people from all walks of life together.
It was at that point. So let's be clear. There had been a couple nights of what could clearly be described as violent protest. But
people, so I would say some small bad actors inside of largely peaceful groups of people
That's
were committing acts of opportunist vandalism, violence.
But that had been days ago. This was during the day.
Days after.
Yeah.
This was people literally sitting on a lawn with children, and I mean it was
since then in this past summer now, which is 18 months, 2 years later. Since then, the investigation has ruled that the police were wrong to have in this particular. Yeah, but I mean, that's unusual, and they didn't rule that into any of the other acts of police. There was a lot of acts of police violence, but in this particular one,
there were people sitting on the lawn.
They seem to have freaked out and gotten nervous and started shooting tear gas is what looked like that happened. Like for no reason, something happened and spooked them and they just started pelting tear gas at everyone.
I think there's about 4,000, 5,000 people having a sit-in from like, just sitting there, listening to each other speak, being together as a community. It was a really beautiful moment, and all of a sudden the police kind of, the real tragic thing about that day was there had been a march, and the people who had organized the march had tried to work with the police department to say, we're going to demonstrate, we're going to exercise our civil rights, and we're going to coordinate with you to make sure that,
that this doesn't happen.
That we can have a sort of a healing moment after 3 days of really intense protest and some people looting and damaging, public property and private property. And, that whole effort was spoiled because the police basically ambushed everyone. They basically came from, Lee Circle's got, it's a roundabout. So you can come from 3 sides, 3 directions, and then just start shooting tear gas at everyone.
Right.
It had been an entirely peaceful, beautiful moment. People like, legally assembling as we're supposed to be able to do. And
in a public square, and this is literally what the Constitution protects.
Yeah, exactly. And they ambushed us, and then basically that was such a insane act of violence. I mean, the area around what we call Marcus David Pierce Circle now is massive, and I was out there documenting what was happening as a photographer, and saw the entire space fill up with tear gas. It was so bad that I had to warn cars 2 blocks over. Once I finally got out of there, I had to warn the cars 2 blocks over, roll up your windows because you're not gonna be able to breathe.
Right. And there were people trampling over. I'm just trying to get
it was really, I mean, I wasn't there. I, watched it on the news like everyone else. It was really bad. And I think that was the moment where people really picked up the all cops are bastards. Like that's like,
right.
You know what I mean? Like up until then, I think people had been like, we don't condone this violence and like breaking glass and graffiti. Like people should stop. And then after that, they were like, oh no, just burn it down. Like,
yeah, I think it was a major breach
it was a huge thing.
Right. But I mean, there wasn't retribution after that. I mean, this was a moment, and then the movement, essentially, those people in the square, sort of just were like, "All right, we're here. You're not going to move us." Yeah. But they weren't fighting back exactly. They were just like, we're
refusing to go home.
Refusing to go home.
Yeah, I mean, it was civil disobedience, like textbook. Like I think that moment, like that catalyzed us, and that catalyzed, I think people had been going to the monument and graffitiing it and speaking there, using it kind of as like
just because it was a natural center point for a visual reminder of the stakes in this.
Yeah.
Well, the presence of white supremacy.
And we've learned later. I didn't know this, right? That those monuments, we like to. The common narrative was that those monuments are commemorating the war, but they're not. They were made in like the 20s as part of a gentrification effort to make all white neighborhoods. I mean, they were visual markers of the struggle against Reconstruction, right? Yeah. And then all the subsequent ones were from the 1960s when the Civil Rights Act was passed.
So the Lee Monument was built in 1890. It was part of a real estate scheme concocted by Robert E. Lee's nephew, who was actually governor of the state, and some really rich real estate developers. At the time in the 1890s, Monument Avenue was kind of the far west end of the city. After that, it was like the sticks and the boonies. Like there's like tobacco fields out there. But this is the time of, the post-Reconstruction era. You've got an emergent black middle class. You've got Jackson Ward emerging as the Harlem of the South, Black Wall Street. So this is a time when white Southerners were feeling threatened. And, as we've seen in recent times, when a dominant group feels threatened, it leads to political radicalization,
which is what happened.
Yeah, and so they basically built this real estate, all whites only, in the advertisements,
and explicitly whites only.
Yeah, they built this development with the statues as the center point, and from 1890 till I think about like 1920, all the statues other than obviously Arthur Ashe were put up, and
right. So that Monument Avenue, which was so quaint when I moved here, is actually a legacy of a really ugly period in American history. Yeah. And I don't know that the protesters who are the people who are sitting there, I don't know that everyone knew that. They just knew that it was a visual marker of the old school white supremacy. This is Richmond, the capital of the Confederacy. So Richmond becomes a center point of national debates about this.
Yeah.
And you're stuck in the middle of this.
I mean, I was, sort of thrust into it. I mean, we kind of thrust ourselves into it. But
Yeah, so let's now again. So you were there when that was. How did the projection start? Because there was no leader. There's nobody. There's no one who says, "Hey, what if we do this?"
No,
it's just a bunch of people.
I mean, it's totally autonomous. Like autonomous collectivism. If that like two things can make sense together. It's like people doing what they want, but trying to do it with each other. You know, it was really great. I mean, like, you know, we went out there the first couple of days, and it was like, how can we help? This is, you know, and if we start thinking, oh, let's get a PA out there. The next day we show up and someone had brought out a PA. People were gathering trash. People were feeding each other. And then, you know, Dustin has all this projection equipment and this, you know, technical knowledge of how to do this really well. You know, we were like, let's go out, do something. We weren't really sure where we were going to go at first. At first, we went and projected some stuff on the side of the Broadberry on Broad Street. And then we kind of, after that went well for a couple hours, we were like, well, let's just go to the monument. And, you know, we were unsure about if that was appropriate because, you know, we were, you know, really aware of what was happening there and that, you know, this was a moment for Black voices and people of color to be heard. And we didn't want to like step on what was happening there. But it felt like
you could do a thing.
It was something that we could do that could contribute, that could be, you know, helpful. And then luckily we went out there and did it, and then it was received really well. Like pretty much like immediately went viral, and it was really dark out there.
What was your first projection?
The first projection was George Floyd. We were using
was it this one or a different one?
It was like a slightly different version of that.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, that kind of famous picture of George Floyd that everyone uses. And then sort of a reel that we got from the National Black Lives Matter org. It kind of showed I think about 40 different victims of police violence.
Right, and it was a slideshow that would rotate.
Just cycling through their faces, putting it up there, and kind of immediately, you know, we modified it a little bit, you know, like to make it show up better, kind of give it, you know, we turned it all to black and white, kind of pushed the contrast, so it had this really stark kind of sort of street art looking feel to it that showed up better. You know, we did, and it kind of immediately went viral and was all over the internet. And then we were like, okay, well, let's keep doing this because it seems like, you know, not only are we amplifying the messages of that and kind of, you know, transforming this really hateful symbol, but we're also, you know, adding this, it seemed to add some kind of like safety and positivity to the space at night, you know, that really kind of, you know, it was just pitch black out there. So there was light,
right,
and people could see, and then we could kind of spotlight the people who were speaking. And then most importantly, why we decided to keep doing it was because we realized this is a way to keep people's attention on what's happening in Richmond.
And you said there was a lot of press, not press exactly, but
well, yeah, I mean, initially, social media, then the press showed up like the next night. And, you know, we realized, you know, at that point, you know, early in the sort of summer 2020, people weren't talking about Richmond. It wasn't those first few weeks. It was not, no one was caring about what's happening in Richmond.
Right.
You know, so this is a way we could keep people focused on what's happening in our community. And we thought by doing that, we could help keep the people out there safer and minimize the possibility for acts of police violence by having people paying attention.
Right.
It was also really, I mean, so I'm a white middle-aged West End mom. You know, we took our kids out at night to watch a projection. You know what I mean? So I had elementary school children who were like excited about like, can we go see the lights again tonight? And, you know, and they learned the names of the victims. As time went on, you guys started projecting art, you know, Black artists and Black art. My children got this amazing education in Black history and in police brutality from watching your lights at night, and they still talk about it. It's yes, so like that. I know that wasn't the purpose, but as one of the side effects, there were families coming down just to, you know, and we talked to a lot of other kids. Same parents had done the same thing, had brought their children in to see this moment and see your light show. It was quite a thing.
So I have a really, it's a weird question. Mm-hmm. We're sitting in a building in the School of the Arts.
Mm-hmm. Are we going to talk about how white we are?
No.
We need to talk about that at some point.
But we're in the School of the Arts, right, in Richmond. And one of the things that I just found absolutely fascinating, and maybe other people don't understand, these statues, right, became the center of a worldwide debate about the purposes and uses of public art, right? Because public art is paid for by the public. So you're talking about, like, what are you doing with that? What's the purpose of this? And we have these statues that were made for a 100% racist reason that then become part of the story the city tells itself about itself. So that identity gets wrapped up. So these statues are part of that. The moment that this becomes really kind of amazing is the Wildy statue, the Kahinde statue, Rumors of War. So for those who don't know, there's a statue. It was of Jeb Stuart, who was this guy riding a horse, and an artist, an African-American artist, came into town to have an exhibit in the Virginia Museum and saw these statues. And his art is amazing. And he will paint largely African-American people in these heroic poses. He paints these and so there's this exhibit there. And he made a statue of a black man astride a horse in exactly the same pose as the J.E.B. Stuart statue. I mean, it's 100%. When that statue was unveiled at the Virginia Museum for Fine Arts, right in front of the Daughters of the Confederacy, you have to understand, like, the space. What I think the rest of the world doesn't understand is the spaces here. There are competing voices about who's who, what's what in the space, right? And so the art becomes hugely important to this. Those statues were more than just statues. They were this national conversation. That Wildy statue, Rumors of War, as soon as that statue came up, we went to that unveiling, and the entire world, if you knew anything about art, you'd recognize that Richmond had just become one of the most important, vibrant sites for this discussion about what public art is. And then you end up projecting art on this art during these moments that people are coming together to talk about this. It's just, in terms of the history of art, it's a remarkable moment. And I don't know that you could have anything. The parallels are very hard to draw other than like the French Revolution. I mean, honest to God, the Colosseum, like there's very few places where art mattered. And you are now projecting art in this way. Were you aware at the moment of the sort of what would you say, the deeper meaning of all this, or were you just like, we just got to do something?
I mean, initially, we just wanted to do something, but I studied history. I'm like Civil War history nerd. I've went to VCU here, studied history, and did my senior paper on the history of Civil War in Richmond, and I did like a way bigger paper than I was supposed to because I got so into the subject matter and found so much information, diving into the archives, going through like the city hall, the city council minutes and stuff, and just seeing like the deeper layer of what was happening there. And we started with just something that we like were trying to amplify other people's voices, but as like
and you had the equipment.
We had the equipment, and as we went on, we started adding more and more stuff, and then we started giving ourselves more creative license to kind of find new things to say and new images to put up. And then eventually, I was just like, well, this is a massive piece of historical propaganda. This is something which is putting forth a fake history. It's basically trying to make, some form of victory out of this loss, to create nobility out of something which is utterly shameful. And then so I was like, well, we need to start bringing in history, and we need to start like directly pushing back against this historical narrative it's putting out into the world. And so, I had been fortunate to had a good education in the early civil rights movement and the abolitionist movement, so I was like, well, let's start putting up, Harriet Tubman, let's start putting up Frederick Douglass, let's start putting up W.B. Du Bois, let's put up, obviously Richmond's own amazing Maggie Lena Walker, to start like, saying these are people who are heroes. And it's like when you juxtapose Robert E. Lee against Harriet Tubman, there's no question about who is the better person, who's the braver person, who's the person who really took chances. And, that kind of just clicked in my mind. And then, we started adding more and more layers of what we were more thought into it. Because every day, we tried to add something new, and we tried to respond to what was happening in Richmond and around the world. And so, the idea of like taking this public piece of art, and turning it, transforming it into meaning something entirely different. What we were doing, I would say, is a larger extension of what was already happening. With every, spray of graffiti, every, painting that got left on the steps, every, all the different things people did there creatively in the circle, we were just a really highly visible part of that. But people, the whole community was transforming this symbol until like slowly taking away its power. If you think about like the history of monuments, people put up monuments to kings and to gods, and it's a way of like the physical labor of making these things, the craftsmanship, the effort, back in the day, like the lives that went into something like that. Like literally people were dying to build these things, and all that effort is symbolic and spiritual, and it's metaphysical. And so you're putting all this energy into something, and with each act, each person going to that monument and reclaiming it, marking it, covering it, using, even if it's just saying, fuck, just being mad, putting swear words on it, whatever you want to do on there, you're taking that energy back.
It's like a spell.
Yeah, exactly. And so by a couple weeks, people who loved that monument, people who were mad about what's happening, it didn't even mean the same thing anymore. They couldn't, that energy was gone. It was never going to be
I loved that monument.
Yeah, when it was covered in graffiti.
I loved that monument my whole life.
Oh, you mean before?
Before it was covered in graffiti. And it was so much better covered in graffiti.
It was a magical moment of transformation into a new thing.
I became a fan of the movement. I wasn't against the movement before, but seeing that reclaimed, understanding the anger that people had for something that I'd never noticed one way. You know what I mean? Like, it was just pretty. It's pretty, right? Like, it's pretty and statuesque. It is very well done. And, and I always loved it because Richmond's got these monuments and I never thought about it. And then seeing it covered with fury and also joy and, people playing basketball and grilling hamburgers and like playing Frisbee and, it
was magical.
It was magical.
Well, and this is when we get to talk about We So White thing.
By the way, we're really white here.
But I mean, so we're talking about the projections on this thing, and we are who we are, but that projection was one part of like the graffiti that's being put on there and the hamburgers that are being grilled and the speeches that are being done and the music that's being played. It's all one thing. It just is a visual focal point. So you weren't leading this movement.
Not at all.
But
no way. I mean, no one was really leading. That was kind of the beautiful thing, is that like there's no leaders. There were no people talk like Black Lives Matter because some organization there is a nonprofit organization called Black Lives Matter, but nobody like giving marching orders to every city. It's like these are spontaneous acts of like people trying to help their community, trying to use their voices for justice. People coming together from all walks of life to say this has to stop. We're tired of seeing Black men, women, and children, getting murdered by the people who are supposed to be protecting us and holding up public order. Right. So I think it was just like, for me personally, way back like 2010 or whenever it was, when Trayvon Martin was killed, and I'd studied history. I knew about the deep nature of American racism. I'd studied the sexual violence of the post-Reconstruction South and how sick it could get. And even then, seeing half the country try and justify and celebrate the murder of a Black child who was walking to the corner store to get some Skittles and iced tea, something, I had done. Mm-hmm. He walked the back way home. It's like, every teenager does that. And this kid got murdered, by a man, and seeing half the country celebrate that just shocked me so deeply. I just could not understand how a human being could celebrate that.
So you said you were cognizant of not wanting to insert your voice to the front of a conversation. Right? Mm-hmm. So I guess two questions. One is how is that interaction? Because every day you're coming up with different things and people are talking to you. You're right there in the middle of all the stuff that's going on. So people are people giving you ideas for all this sort of stuff? Some
people were. I mean, we had, it's kind of like, there's the four corners of the kind of crosswalks at the circle, and kind of people end up setting up stations sort of at each one. There's like one area people were feeding people, one area where people were defending people, one area where people were giving out food, and we had one in the little area we were projecting from. And so you'd meet people all night, you'd have conversations, you'd try and the nature of the technology, you can respond to what's happening.
So you personally felt a human disgust with the ugly things that you were seeing.
Oh yeah,
and you had equipment.
Yeah, we felt. We wanted to do something. We took a chance on doing something positive. It was well received, and most importantly, it was well received by the people at the space.
And then are they coming up to you and saying, "Hey, man, keep going," or "Here's an idea"?
Yeah, we met a lot of people, and we got a lot of support, and we had people give us great ideas about the whole reason why we started incorporating Pride Month is we had a conversation with this woman who was like talking to us about how she was glad everything was happening right now, but she was hoping that people could talk a little bit more about LGBTQ voices. And we were like, okay, yeah, let's make sure that's included here, because that's, representative of people from all ethnic backgrounds, and, it's important. It's another form of injustice in our society. And, we decided to, it was just stuff like that, just kind of incorporating that. People, we'd meet academics, professors, other activists, who just talk to us, and that would kind of inspire us. So we'd go for a march during the day, see what was happening, and then that would change what we put up at night. So it was a real fluid kind of spur of the moment process.
And you're also, you're kind of conspicuous, right? So people, it's not hard to figure out where you're sitting.
Right, yeah. There's a big bright light.
There's a big bright light.
Yeah.
And you have car batteries running this stuff? Your equipment?
Various power sources. We were running off of generators first, and it was really loud. And then we started going for car batteries. Someone bought us some boat batteries that lasted a little bit longer.
That's what Tara did that.
And then, you did?
My kids raised money.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that.
I was like, no, you'll never. It was always dark. Right? Yeah.
I think Dustin.
She was part of the West End moms.
The West End supply train. We just raised money for people who didn't know how to help.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, just brought in supplies. Yeah.
The big Marcus David Peters sign.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
She funded that.
A lot of people funded that.
She spearheaded.
A lot of people funded that.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
We planted it in the ground.
We did not. Nobody planted it. You got to cut that out. Nobody planted it in the ground.
It just showed up. It just showed up.
It just showed
cut that
up.
out.
Yeah,
Nobody
yeah.
planted it in the
It
ground.
was 4 feet down with concrete.
anything.
No,
Yeah.
you don't know that.
I do, in fact. I know that. But
Well,
okay,
wonderful.
so
I'm sorry I didn't make that connection.
There was no way you were ever going to make that connection.
people are bringing you stuff. It's
Yeah,
kids are helping
it's a
out.
big community, and people are talking to you, and you're one aspect of this,
Mhm.
right? And then these monuments get taken down.
Eventually.
Right.
Yeah.
Eventually.
We projected for a year
A year
straight. We did 2 months nonstop, and then we went out at least maybe a dozen times a month, every month after that. We projected until June of 2021.
Holy shit!
And then, we had life and jobs take us away those last 2 months. But we did it for a year straight. And
So you're out there every night for a year?
every night for 2.5 months. And then
Like weekends, at least.
weekends and weeknights. And when there were moments, when there was just important moments, we have to say
Juneteenth,
something.
you were there, yeah.
Yeah, Juneteenth, after January 6th, we went out that night.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. We just kind of went out there and, did our thing. It got really cold, got really hot. So,
All right.
Yeah, by the end of it, after they put the fence up, it was just us and then BLM
Oh, that's
804
right.
Yeah.
on
That's right.
on
Yeah.
opposite sides of the thing. And, we know those guys, but we didn't have a whole lot of coordination between us, but it was just us and them out there at a certain point. And then people with big trucks and guns who would come around to harass us every once in a while.
That's my question. So you weren't hard to find for the people who you were trying to help.
Yeah.
You also weren't hard to find for the people who did not dig you being there.
Yeah, not at all.
Did the cops give you any trouble?
No, I mean, we kind of
Did people,
legally, we weren't breaking any laws legally. We were on city property, projecting onto state property, and technically it's public property. You can't project on a private business. That's technically illegal. I mean, you can if you want to, and I encourage people if they're really upset to do that. But technically you could get arrested for that. But we weren't breaking any laws. And we got so much attention at first, within the first day of doing it, that we weren't, we have a pretty strong free speech argument, First Amendment argument, first of all.
Oh yeah.
And then at the same time, the cops were way more concerned about other people than us. And then they knew if they did something towards us, they'd get a lot of attention.
Oh yeah,
for
the
that.
news would be all over.
Yeah, so it kind of.
So did anyone did they ever come over and talk to you?
I mean, we got tear gassed with everyone else, we got to experience all that alongside everyone. But yeah, we only had 2 direct encounters with police, and they were pretty, they just came over to talk to us. We're like, what y'all doing? We're like, well, you know what we're doing. And they're like, what does that mean? I was like, it means what it says, they're like, what does this mean? I was like, there's literally giant words on the monument right now. But, it wasn't bad. I mean, we were fortunate to not be targeted. I mean, I knew people who were stalked on their walk homes by RPD, and especially it was mostly young women. It was young women
really?
who were being stalked by police officers on their walks home. And, which is just insane to think that someone would do that, but, it was happening. So, I mean, we got off extremely light. I have friends who got, shot with rubber bullets. I got, Guy almost lost an eye, you know. I mean, I got tear gassed pretty bad a few times, and you know, I still think I may be having some residual health effects from that. But you know, in terms of like the brutality being directed at me, once we were projecting, it wasn't happening.
What about the guys in the trucks with the guns who came down?
You know, I mean, they were mad at everyone. I mean, I think the great thing about what was happening with what we were doing is like light is so peaceful. It's so non-destructive. It's so, you know, soothing.
Right.
We had people come down angry and want to debate us and argue with us. And then, you know, there's like, you know, by the end of the conversation, like you could actually talk because the whole time they're just like looking at what's happening, you know?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like,
Yeah,
speaking
and
to
you
them,
have some movement in it.
Yeah, it's like speaking to them as we're having the conversation. They're seeing Harriet Tubman and Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and
They must be slowly recognizing that they're on the wrong side of this argument.
some people were. I had one lady.
Harriet Tubman is on the other side.
Yeah, it's like
You're arguing the wrong side.
yeah, exactly.
If God be on our side, who could be against us?
You know, but it was you know, we got some scary moments for sure. There were some nights where it was just we were the only ones out there, and like you know, people came to Marcus David Peters' circle, like the people who weren't coming there to be friendly came there looking for trouble. And I got the feeling, you know, I saw someone, you know, when it was crazy out there, when there was like hundreds of people, I saw a guy put his hand out his truck, shoot up in the air. And because there were like fireworks and stuff going, no one noticed. But there's, you know, the people came out there just to terrorize people. And I think looking for reasons to kill people. They wanted to like hype themselves up to do an act of violence because they're like, you know, high on like, you know, white nationalism. They're high on the Trump insanity. They're maybe drunk or high themselves, you know, but we'd have these ugly moments, but we never really, you know, the worst moment that happened is I had a gun laser sight go across my face once.
Oh, shit.
And that terrified me. And that was the closest we came to getting hurt.
For the record, people who don't know, Marcus David Peters, who was he?
So Marcus David Peters was an educator here in Richmond who had a mental health crisis and ended up being killed by the police. He's the brother of Princess Blanding, who ran for governor in 2020, who's part of the Justice and Reformation movement. You know, and the thing, you know, Princess, getting to know Princess and talking with her, you know, Princess talks a lot about, you know, how that's like the lowest moment of her brother's life when he died. He was this beloved person. He was this educator, beautiful piano player, really wonderful person. And, you know, he had a mental health episode, which, you know, I think a lot of people have family members who've had a mental health crisis. But because he was a black man, you know, he was treated differently and he was executed, you know, and there's no reason he should have been killed. You know, I mean, there's a million things that could have happened. Right. To like help him
to de-escalate,
but instead of help, he got death, and you know, that's what she said: help, not death. And so, you know, Marcus was killed, I believe, in like 2018.
So they sort of the group, the collective down there, renamed what was Robert E. Lee Circle, became Marcus David Peters Circle.
Yeah,
yeah, and I think that started with a small sign somebody put up, just a protester put up, renaming the circle, and then I just call them all the Confederates. The you know, white Nash, the other side came through and took the sign down. And so a collective of people got some money together, hired a sign maker, and put a new sign in the ground. A big, well-painted, solid steel sign.
4 feet deep with concrete.
Different sign.
Oh, different one.
And then that stayed there for months and months and months, at which point, then at some point, the Confederates came back through again and chainsawed it off and just took it and posted pictures on the internet of the sign in somebody's backyard covered in Confederate flags. At that point, the collective then came through and collected more money and built a steel sign concreted into the ground.
Random people.
Rumor has it that it was, then concreted into the ground. And that
at a depth of 4 feet.
Yeah. I wouldn't know.
It wouldn't go anywhere.
And that really kind of, all of that, basically, people have been calling it Marcus David Peters Circle since, I guess, the first month of the protest. I guess since
a couple weeks
since like June 2020, people have just been referring to it as Marcus David Peters Circle. But that last sign stayed until the monument came down, and they took the state took the sign with it, which is now in the Valentine.
Oh, I didn't realize
the museum is holding
Good for
not
them.
just that sign, but all the smaller signs, the portraits of Black people who have been killed. They're holding
I didn't realize they'd
everything
gotten that.
They got everything. Yeah. So that's a nice outcome.
So you're part of this movement.
Yeah.
You are doing things that are having a pretty quickly recognizable positive impact. Social media, the news, all this sort of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
You sort of stumbled upon this recipe of peaceful protest and art mixed together, right?
Yeah.
Which was not a thing that you knew before. You just happen to have some equipment and be in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
And dedication. Let's not.
Yeah. I mean, we've been involved in some, political activism, but we'd never really done large scale public art,
When did you form the organization Reclaiming the Monument?
I mean, that was pretty grassroots sort of thing. I mean, it just kind of organically happened, we were doing it every night. It was just kind of nonstop momentum. And at some point, we decided we were going to do a print fundraiser and we needed a name for the print fundraiser. So we called it Reclaiming the Monument. And then that kind of just became the name of the project. And then as that project grew, it's become like our organization.
Well, and you say that project grew. I mean, so essentially you were asked to do more stuff like this at other places, or you were able to do more.
We were
stuff
able to. I mean, we've been asked by some people. I mean, this has led to, a number of, opportunities to work in public spaces, and then there's some private opportunities. But it's really just kind of grown organically. I mean, we did like a year, like I said, like a year with no support other than like what people would give us. And, because of COVID and, we had the time to do it. But yeah, so I guess like it was fall of 2020. We started speaking at colleges and universities. We found ourselves suddenly thrust in this national conversation about public art and monuments and people wanting us to talk about them.
Right.
Which we never expected, but,
Is that weird to suddenly be a voice that people want to hear from?
it's a lot of responsibility. It's pressure and a little anxiety inducing. But I mean, we were just really, enthusiastic about keeping doing what we were doing because we felt like it was having a positive effect. And, especially as like once the fence went up, we were the last people who could actually touch the monument in some
With
sense.
light, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, suddenly we were like, we had to do this for the people who got kicked out of that space. But in around 2020, the Mellon Foundation, Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, announced they were doing this monuments project, $250 million fund for a monuments project. And, they name dropped us, I think, in NPR and the New York Times. And we were like, okay.
So you hadn't applied for it.
They just mentioned that the art we were making was the type of things they wanted to fund. And so we're like, okay, well, let's
apply for that.
Perhaps we should apply for that.
Yeah,
then.
we should. Well, we didn't even apply. We talked. So we were on a panel with Julie B. Ehrlich, who's the chief of staff for the Mellon Foundation. And we got to know Julie through that. And then we reached out. We talked with Julie for a while. And we kind of worked together for about a year and a half, figuring out how we could make a proposal with them, how we could get a grant to make sure. Our ambition with that was to make sure it's like, well, this is a great opportunity to make, they've already name dropped us. So we know they're interested in our work. And we know that we can bring some of this money to Richmond and make sure it goes into the right hands.
And let's do something good with it.
Let's do something good, but let's also make sure, like, we can, all these people who we've been meeting and having conversations with in the city who've been doing work way, way, way longer than us, like 20 years, make sure they get some of this money, make sure they can finally get paid for the stuff they've been doing for free, and hopefully use the attention we have on us to put attention on them.
So this is, you received some criticism for accepting money in place, but because the argument was that you're taking money from people of color who should have gotten it instead. And so how do you respond to that?
I mean, I'm very sympathetic to that point of view. I mean, I didn't let that, those kind of comments, I think, they were made like when the initial news was announced.
Right.
And, that was done in a way which I wasn't necessarily comfortable with because it didn't have a lot of nuance and a lot of details about what we were actually doing.
Right.
But, I think the people, like especially some of the more vocal people who I know who were upset about it, when we've talked to them, they figure out what we were actually doing with it. They weren't upset. And so I never really was too bothered about it because I knew what we were doing.
Right.
I knew like the Mellon Foundation was very careful about, making sure we were doing this the right way. We were very careful about making sure we do it the right way. And we knew like that they were interested in talking with other people in Richmond. I mean, we worked with the JXN project. They got a grant from the Mellon Foundation recently. There's some other folks who are talking with the Mellon Foundation who've gotten much larger sums of money. So we thought this was just a way to make sure some of that money came to Richmond.
Right. So what I'm hearing is that it's not like that money was, you're not taking the money from anyone else. You're actually using your visibility to be able to try and shine the spotlight on other people as well.
Yeah, that's the goal. I mean, we wanted to make sure that, we knew we had opportunity to try and bring some of this money to Richmond. So much of what historically happens in Richmond is this very top-down approach. It's like, they'll use community voices when it's convenient, but then quickly sideline them and silence them. And so we're like, well, here's a way that we can make sure we can make large-scale public art that continues the conversation that was started at Marcus David Pierce Circle and continues the conversation that these activists who've been doing work in the city for years have been doing in a way that is highly visible, that people are paying attention to, and make sure they get paid. And so, that was our goal. But I'm totally, I think all that criticism is valid. I do think on some level, the fact that we're two white guys was easier for say a local news channel to be like, oh, look at these special white boys doing this nice thing.
It's a simple explanation of a complicated problem.
Yeah. So, I'm totally sympathetic to that. And that's something we've been really careful about. And we've kind of struggled with, been like, well, we don't want to take up space in the conversation. We don't want to overshadow other people. But ultimately, the conversations we've had with the people in the community who we really respect and the people whose opinions really matter to us have been encouraging and helped us trust that we were doing the right thing.
And what projects have you done since then? So what were some of the first things after this amazing thing?
Over the last year, since we got the grant from the Mellon Foundation in December 2021, and then over the last year, we've been doing series of installations for what we're calling the Recontextualizing Richmond project. Series of installations around town with different historians, activist organizations, talking about neglected aspects of Richmond's history, but also trying to show that you can make public art that's community driven, that amplifies grassroots voices, and that it can be done. You can bring people together to make a piece of art.
So can you tell me, paint a picture of one of these?
So our main partner in this, our fiscal sponsor, is the Valentine Museum. So they helped us get the grant because we're in the process of becoming a nonprofit organization, but we weren't at the time.
Okay.
And so they helped us get the grant, and they're the stewards of our money. But the first project was with the American Civil War Museum, and then a number of historians around Richmond. And the American Civil War Museum now owns the former White House of the Confederacy.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So we worked with 5 historians to tell the stories of, people who, free and enslaved domestic workers inside the White House of the Confederacy.
Which is kind of an amazing story.
Yeah. There's a lot there. It was, I knew a good amount. Most people know about Mary Jane Richards. Most people know her as Mary Bowser.
Right.
This famous, she and her status as a free and enslaved person is kind of this really nebulous thing in terms of some people think she was free, but she was treated as enslaved. She was undercover as enslaved. But basically the story about her is we know for sure, according to her own words, that she went into the White House of the Confederacy on at least one occasion as a washerwoman and went through some of Jefferson Davis's documents. Right. And she's this legendary person. She's got a star at the CIA headquarters. It's this famous spy. But there's a lot of urban myths about her as well. And so we want to be really careful about how we told her story. So we worked with a panel of 5 historians to tell her story. But while doing that, we uncovered all these other individuals who are there. And these people, there's remarkable histories, people who were in the newspaper regularly in the 1860s, people who, worked at the White House of the Confederacy, then ran away, and then went on world tours talking about their experience, and gave really valuable intelligence to the United States Army. So that we found there's about 5 individuals who we told their stories and who we had at least depictions of. We had some photographs of some of them, but others we had etchings. We were able to put their face, use AI to upscale the images and improve them because they're pretty grainy old daguerreotypes and stuff like that, and put them on the side of the White House Confederacy. But Mary Jane Richards, there's no picture of her. And so we worked with a local artist named Miguel Carter Fisher in consultation with these 5 historians to create an oil painting of Mary Jane Richards that we, was the centerpiece of the project that was just projected on the side of the White House of the Confederacy for 3 nights. And it's now hanging in the lobby of the Valentine. It's a really beautiful painting. Miguel's a brilliant genius painter, also a professor now at VCU. And I encourage anyone who wants to go see one of the most beautiful paintings I think that's ever come out of Richmond to go look at that. It's an absolute masterpiece.
I'm kind of fascinated by this. I want to wrap, but I'm fascinated by, if I'm walking down the street, there's Jefferson Davis's house, right? And I don't know anything about it, but now suddenly there's a projection on it, and of these people, like how, and I'm now, it's now different, and there's now a conversation about what that narrative of who we are and what we are as a public people, right? So you are taking the time and putting the effort in to make these conversations begin to happen in this public space.
And
right?
if you're not, I mean, I cannot stress enough that if you are from Richmond and you are from Virginia, these conversations never happened before.
No, I had no idea.
Every school child in public school in Virginia ended up touring the White House of the Confederacy as part of a school trip when they were little. And we all went through, and I don't think anybody ever talked about these stories. It was just, this is Jefferson Davis's living room, and this is the parlor, and then they have got artifacts, and nobody ever, like, these conversations didn't happen. It was taken for granted, and we all grew up with this just being, obviously, there's statues of these guys. Like, we never thought about it.
So you are literally part of a change in the world to un-whitewash history, right?
That's the goal of the project. I mean, it's just like the monuments were such, blatant historical propaganda. I mean, when you study these guys, they're not good guys, but, like she's saying, if you look at a lot of times in Virginia, you'll get inundated with these, well, he wasn't that bad and he treated his slaves pretty good. And it's all bullshit. And, but people were indoctrinated with this. And even when I was a kid in the 90s, it was kind of treated as a wash about the Civil War. And my family, we're from Pennsylvania. So like my dad, I remember in first grade, we'd been in Virginia for a couple years and we started talking about the Civil War. And in my mind, I was immediately like, okay, there's a good side and a bad side. There's the slavery side and there's the anti-slavery side. And then some kid just got mad at me, and like half my class was like, you're a dirty Yankee. And I got called a dirty Yankee all day. And there's like me and this little black girl sitting next to me. And she's like, no, y'all, he's right. Like, what is wrong with y'all? And me and her just all there, just like, and we're little kids. I'm like 7 years old. And we're just like, what the hell is going on?
I am full of burning fury as a descendant of Confederate veterans on every side of my family, which I can't do anything about.
Right. Yeah.
But I am full of this burning fury that I was an adult before I realized the amount of propaganda that we all just swallowed after, like in the last 100 years. The Civil War was 150 years ago, but somewhere in the last 100 years, the Daughters of the Confederacy fed us all of this and we just swallowed it. Right. And I cannot believe how I'm 46. I was like 44 before I started realizing how much of this we swallowed. And I'm just mad at how stupid we are.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, you get people young. That's the whole idea.
Yeah.
The Daughters of the Confederacy wanted to change the way America learned about the Civil War.
And they did.
And they were wildly successful.
It's amazing.
They were wildly successful.
I'm really mad. I'm still mad. I'm going to die mad. Yeah.
I mean, it's really tragic. I mean, luckily my dad sat me down because I came home and I was like, well, what the hell is a Yankee, Dad? And he was like, okay, no, they're a bunch of assholes. Like, this, he just broke it all down to me. He's like, you're right. They're wrong. He told me about Monument Avenue. I think memorably referred to it as Loser's Lane, which is still
That's good. Yeah.
my favorite things my dad
So
has said.
what's next? You fell upon this amazingly unique moment in American history at exactly the right place and exactly the right time with exactly the right equipment and a good heart, right? And a willingness to listen and act. And now you are part of a larger retelling of our American story. Right, locally, and you're using what you learned during that other moment to do this. Paint a picture for me. What are you doing 5 years from now?
I mean, I have no idea about 5 years from now. I'm still trying to figure out next year, honestly. I mean, this, we've gotten into this whole thing, kind of taking it moment by moment. we worked pretty hard to get this last year to happen. We were able to do 5 installations across the city. We're doing this last one with the Pamunkey Indian tribe at Libby Hill. And so we've been able to work with this really amazing group of Pamunkey artists to help, amplify their voices. And, no one talks about Richmond as a place that was once, an indigenous settlement and people lived here, and there's a village here in 1607 when Christopher Newport sailed up the James River and planted this cross in the middle of the river to say, I own you now. Like, there was a village here. There were people living here. There was an entire, confederation of tribes that were, building, a nation state at the time.
So do you see what you've done now as sort of a method? So essentially what you have is a system or a method for amplifying stories in public spaces. Is that kind of what you have now?
Yeah. I think, what we were trying to do is show that, we got thrust in this conversation about like the future of public art in Richmond. And we saw, the world's whole attention was grabbed by this massive community effort, this collective redecoration and recontextualization of Monument Avenue, of the Lee statue. And, it was the most powerful thing I've ever experienced in my life. And, we want to make sure that as we move forward as a city and as a nation, as a world, that we don't make the same mistakes we keep making over and over again, and that we let the people, the activists in our community have a voice and have a say in what's next. And, hopefully this last year, these projects have shown that there's a model for creating a process where community members can get together, create consensus, and then make an impactful piece of art. And, we weren't sure about at the beginning of the year if we were going to try and continue this, but after this year, it's been so powerful. It's been so amazing to see the power of collaboration and how you get people together. You can make something better than like the root of the idea. A lot of times as creative director, my job is to kind of find a direction, because then you get 5 people together, conversation go anywhere, to try and synthesize and lead the conversation of like, all right, how can we turn this conversation into a work of art? So a lot of times I'll come up with kind of the seed of the idea, but then, you get other artists and historians and museum professionals together. You talk for 3 months, you eventually come up with something amazing. And it's always better than whatever the little seed, the little creative spark. As an artist, as a person who's creative, it's so easy to get wrapped up in your own mind and just like obsess about this little detail because it has to be your way. But it's been great to like take my creativity and Dustin's creativity and to like channel it through working with other people, because you always get something that's greater,
greater than the sum of its parts.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, we want to try and continue this model. We want to try and expand using this art form towards other subject matter like environmental justice, talk about other social issues rather. And then this year has all been about history, kind of continuing the second part of what we see the conversation we started, or we were part of, I should say, with our projection work at the Lee Monument. And so if that's the fake history, what's the real history? And we want to continue to amplify artists and help make sure that there's a landscape of public art in Richmond and other places that speaks to justice and empowers artists, and it isn't beholden on politicians who have various motives, deciding what we saw. You see 1890, you had a politician create the Lee Monument, and it was to aggrandize his own uncle. It was to be part of a backroom real estate scheme, which I'm sure he made money off of, and a lot of other people made money off of. And we've seen the awful consequences of that, for over 100 and 130 years. So we want to make sure that as an organization, through our efforts, that we're promoting public art which speaks the truth and justice.
That's interesting, because I hadn't thought of that. It's art. It's the power of art. You're talking about there was an evil side to the power of art.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's you can, Hitler used public art,
right?
Not to name drop the big bad guy, but it's a powerful medium, and it's the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. It's the things, you think about Monument Avenue, and people have talked a lot about this. Imagine being a young Black child growing up, in the 1980s, 1970s, when there still was all like a much more of this, neo-Confederate bullshit being taught in schools, just going on your school bus, going to school, seeing, this guy who
looms larger than
who murdered people to enslave your people, being a hero, a high on a 60-foot pedestal. that visual language says so much about society. And it's art, the beautiful thing we found is that art, really can bypass the brain, get to the heart. And, like you can kind of reach people with like common humanity. You can kind of touch people's soul. And that's kind of our goal, is just to make sure that people, we're using whatever attention we have, whatever platform we have, whatever financial resources we're able to get via the attention we received, to spread it throughout our community and to make sure that truth and justice and, public awareness is being directed in the right ways.
And it's reclaimingthemonument.com.
Yeah, that's our main website. Yeah. And we're on Instagram, Twitter, all that fun stuff.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
I appreciate you. So if anyone wants to reach out, reclaimingthemonument.com.
Sure. Yeah, reclaimingthemonument.com.
Thanks for everything, my friend.
All right. Thank you,
Thanks.
guys.
And we're out. Visit reinventionpodcast.com for transcripts and other free resources.